All right, we're getting into the exciting world of hypothesis testing. So this first section is all about the language of hypothesis testing. So we're just setting the stage. Here's all the vocab so that whenever we actually start to do some testing in the next couple of sections, then we have the vocab down and we understand what it is that we're actually working with. All right, that's kind of the concept of this first one. So let's take a look here. A friend of yours wants to play a simple coin flipping game. If a coin comes up heads, you win. If it comes up tails, your friend wins. Suppose the outcome of 5 plays is tails, 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 tails. Is your friend cheating? Ooh, so I don't know. Let's do a little bit of work here. What's the probability that you get 5 tails in a row? So this is a probability that we've already done. Well, if you get the exact same thing 5 times in a row, right? So tails times tails times tails times tails, the exact same thing 5 times, then that's, plug that in your calculator. What do you get? You get 0.03125. All right, so that's the probability. So basically, if I'm looking at this is 3 out of 100 flips. That's an arrow. So here's the question, right? So we want to determine, is this happening? So here's our question. Is your friend cheating or did they get real lucky? Or did they get lucky? That's a question mark. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the concept of hypothesis testing. We're not answering this question. We're just setting the stage here, right? So the question is here, okay, so we've got a hypothesis, right? Setting the stage. What is a hypothesis? How are we going to set this up? So then we have this question. Are we cheating or did your friend get lucky? This is the heart of hypothesis testing. All right. Okay. Now, in true form, we wouldn't get away without doing some vocabulary. So we got quite a bit this go around. So let's do it. A hypothesis is a statement regarding a characteristic of one or more populations. A characteristic of one or more populations. If we're going to do testing, so a hypothesis testing is a procedure based on sample evidence and probability. Sample evidence and probability. Used to test statements regarding a characteristic of one or more populations. So I wanted to put both of these on here because regarding the hypothesis, right? So if we're doing hypothesis testing, a hypothesis is just a statement regarding a characteristic of one or more populations. So we're setting it up, right? We're saying this is happening and then we're going to test that. We're going to get sample evidence and probability to test the hypothesis. That's kind of how this is going to play out, all right? So there are steps in testing this hypothesis. Here they are. First of all, you're going to make a statement regarding the nature of the population. What do we already know? What are we trying to figure out, right? That's our statement. Then we're going to collect evidence to test this statement. What are we trying to figure out? Just like in science, right? You state a hypothesis, then you have to gather evidence. Sometimes this evidence supports what it is that you think, and sometimes it doesn't. Either way, you're going to come up with an answer. So you analyze this data to assess the plausibility of the statement. Are we backing our statement based on the data? Does it make our statement true? Does it make our statement, do we keep our statement or is our statement false? Do we reject the statement? All right. So that is the steps in hypothesis testing, just like in any hypothesis testing, right? All right. So the first thing that we start with is called a null hypothesis. So we have two different pieces that we're going to be working with. We have a null hypothesis and we have an alternative hypothesis. These are the two pieces of info. A null hypothesis is denoted by H naught. The little sub-zero, you say not, like a zero, right? Sometimes you say not. That means initial. Anytime you say H naught, that is the initial. It's what you start with. It's your status quo, all right? Is a statement to be tested. The null hypothesis is a statement of no change, no effect, or no difference, and is assumed true until the evidence indicates otherwise. The evidence indicates otherwise. All right, so the null hypothesis. This is the statement to be tested. This is what you start with. This is what's also sometimes called the status quo. Oopsie-daisy. Status quo. What you start with, your initial statement. It is a statement to be tested. It's what you start with. All right? Okay. Then you have your alternative hypothesis, denoted H1, so subscript 1. So H naught is your initial value that you're starting with, your status quo. Initial statement. All right. And then your alternative hypothesis is a statement where we are trying to find evidence to support. Okay, that is what we're going with. So we're starting off with, okay, here's what we actually have to begin with. We have a null hypothesis. Based on what we currently know, this is what we know. That's what we start with. That's the initial. And then we're like, I don't know if that's legit. I think this is what's happening instead. And that is my alternative hypothesis. That is what we're trying to find evidence to support. Sometimes my evidence supports it, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we stick with the null hypothesis, and sometimes we change our minds with the alternative hypothesis because that's the data is now supporting the new thing that we're coming up with. See that? Okay. So, in this chapter, there are 3 ways to set up the null and alternative hypotheses. They are equal hypothesis versus not equal. This is two-tailed, meaning whatever it is that I start off with the null always equals some value. Now, I want to point something out to you real quick. The null hypothesis equals some value. The null hypothesis equals some value. The null hypothesis equals some value. Because that's what you start with. That's what you start with. So whenever you're saying the null hypothesis, that is no change, no effect, no difference, because it's what you start with. That is your null hypothesis, what you start with. So there is no question about that one. The question is between the alternative hypothesis. That's the question. So are we just saying that this is not equal to this? Is there just some change that is happening? So that is not equal. That's in a not equal sign. Equal. So does not equal, right? So it's just different. There is some kind of change that it is different. I don't know if it's greater than, I don't know if it's less than. It's just different. That's all we need to know is that it's just straight up different. Or Are we looking at this and saying that the equal versus less than? It's always equal because that's what we start with. A left-tailed test means that I'm saying, oh, the new thing I'm looking for is going to be less than the value. Smaller than, less than. So in particular, whatever we're starting with, our status quo, the null hypothesis, my new thing, I'm like, no, I don't think it's quite that much anymore. I think it's less than whatever we're trying to figure out. All right? Or this is greater than, and because it's a right-tailed test, it ends up being a right-tailed test. I start with my parameter, that's some value no matter what. Now I'm saying, I think it's greater than whatever value it is that we're talking about. All right? Something else I want to point out. This is a value and this is a value that is the same value. These are always the same. The only thing that changes is your symbol. These numbers are exactly the same every single time. Whatever value I'm starting with, I'm still comparing to that same value. Whatever value you start with, you're comparing to the same value. Whatever value you start with, you're comparing to the same value. The only difference between the alternative and the null hypothesis is that comparison. All right? So that's setting the stage. This is setting it up of how we're going to work our hypothesis testing. So it's important to kind of get this understanding of where we're pulling this off.